Hello friends, welcome. I hope you all are doing well. This video will continue with the Legolas theme builds I've already made, and the project this week are these Lothlorien Arrows Legolas receives from Galadriel when the Fellowship is departing. One of these arrows sold at Prop Store a few years ago, and because of that they had some very high-res shots of the arrow which helped tremendously in my modeling process. We see Legolas wield these through part of the Fellowship and all of the Two Towers in the Return of the King. The build is pretty straightforward, and to keep the arrowheads the correct scale and thickness, I will 3D print them. So without any more intro, let's get to the point, and let's get started. I printed 6 of these arrowheads, but you could technically make a quiverful if you wanted. I printed mine with a 25% infill to make them pretty solid, but the very tips of the arrowheads have a little bit of a wobble. This is because as the printer head prints the layers are still warm when the next layer is being printed on top, and the hot on hot creates the ripple. This is easy to fix and only happens when printing something like this fine narrow point. To harden the tips up and help smooth them, I first apply a couple of drops of zip kicker to the 3D print. Then I add a few drops of ZA glue. By having the piece coated with the zip kicker, it will begin to cure the glue as soon as the glue touches it. There are some bumps of glue, but that is no big deal, and they can easily be removed by taking some 220 grit sandpaper and sanding the hardened glue so that it is even with the 3D print. You can see how the glue has filled in the wobble, and the tip is looking more solid than it did before. For the shaft of the arrow, I'm using 36-inch long dowels that have a diameter of 1/4 inch. The arrowhead can be glued onto them with the same CA glue. When the head is put on, I take a minute to make sure it is in line with the shaft and doesn't appear to be askew. Once I'm happy with the placement, I then drip on some zip kicker so it'll set the glue instantly, keeping the arrowhead in place. Now to smooth the arrowhead, I thin some spot putty with acetone in a 1:1 mixture. This is then loaded into an old airbrush and sprayed onto the arrowhead. This will help fill in the print layer lines without affecting the subtle engraving. While I continue to spray, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you never miss a project. Thank you. Now we are going to carve the knock into the wooden dowel. To do that, I am using a medium grit sanding drum on my Dremel and carve 2 shallow divots on opposite sides from each other. You want to make sure they are big enough to fit your thumb and forefinger. Then I switch the drum for a cutting wheel and slice out a notch for the bowstring. At this point, the spot putty acetone combo should be completely cured and can be smoothed with some 400 grit sandpaper. This will make a little bit of a mess, and make sure you don't breathe in any of the dust or have it near pets or children. Once they're all sanded, the arrowheads can be sprayed with some 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. I'm only going to give them 2 coats, and I'll let the first coat sit for a half hour before applying the next. Once the primer is dry, the pieces can be sanded again with the 400 grit sandpaper. This will help even off the surface and mask any print lines that may still be visible. And while sanding, I'm making sure the design on the surface has not been filled in with the primer. If it looks like it has been, the sandpaper can be folded in half to reach in and open it back up. To make them look really smooth so we can make them look like metal in the end, I wet sand them. First, I apply a thin layer of water with a brush and then sand the surface with some 1000 grit sandpaper. This fine grit plus the water will polish up the surface nicely, giving an ultra smooth finish. Now, with them all smooth, they can be based with some glossy black spray paint. This glossy black works really well as a base for metallic paints. I'm not sure exactly what the science is behind it or why it works, but a combination of the black with the gloss really make metallics pop, as you'll see in a little bit. Since I used a cheap glossy black, I let the black sit overnight to make sure any tackiness in the paint was gone before spraying them with a metallic gold. When working with metallic sprays, you want to build up thin, even layers. Metallics are very likely to run and drip, but take your time and build up coverage and you'll be fine. And this is how the arrowhead is looking after 2 thin layers. I think I'll spray one more and call it good after that. Okay, with all the arrowheads painted gold, I want to now make them look a little more like the ones in the film. This means toning down the gold a little, and to do that, I'm using some deep bronze metallic acrylic. Using a small round brush, I pounce the bronze onto the arrowhead surface and then lightly dab with a crumpled up paper towel. This will create some variation in the paint surface, making the piece look more aesthetically pleasing than if I had left it solid gold. And here with the painted one beside a non-painted one, you can see how the bronze tones down the brightness of the gold and how the pouncing and dabbing create a subtle paint texture on the surface. Next, I paint the dowels with a wash of burnt umber and let that dry. Then I take some of this fresh olive green, thin it with some water, and brush this onto the end with the knock and about halfway down the shaft. The authentic movie arrow from Propway had this subtle variation in the shaft, making it almost look like fresh wood. I repeat the same process with this English ivy green over the same areas, except I don't go down the shaft nearly as far as I did with the fresh olive. Now for the fletching, I'm using some thick vinyl. I looked locally and I couldn't find any feathers that would work correctly, but cutting the shape out of the vinyl will work just as nicely. To paint the fletching, I'm using a mixture of these three colors. This I then brush onto the feathers, making sure to keep my brush marks following the way the lines would naturally occur in a real feather. I'm also using a fine bristle flat brush. That way the brush marks left behind will create the illusion of feather texture. I then take the straight yellow paint and give the feathers a second coat with just it, leaving some of the previous mixture to show through. To attach the feathers, I apply a thin bead of CA glue along the flat side and align it onto the wooden dowel, then use some zip kicker to cure the glue. Each arrow gets 3 feathers attached to it about ½ an inch below the grooves carved for the finger grips. Then I use some natural hemp cord to give the visual of an attaching cord. This is wound over the ½ inch between the grip and the feather, and then spirals down through the feather and wraps under the feather for another ½ an inch before it can be secured and trimmed. For the final step, I took some scissors and sliced up the feather to create some variation in the surface edges the way real feathers would naturally be. I'm using the brush marks in the paint as guides so the cuts match the direction. And with that, 6 Legolas Lothlorien arrows are complete. This is probably the easiest build I've ever made on my channel, but it goes to show that even though a build may be easy, it doesn't mean that you can't end up with an authentic prop that you can be proud of. These arrows got tested with the Legolas bow I made a few weeks back, and they worked beautifully together. Check out the bow construction video as well. Well everyone, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. I'll post a link to the arrow files below in case you want to make some. Again, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.